"This is not for a woman," my father said, handing my entire life's work to my incompetent brother. That day, I walked away with nothing. A year later, as my own firm was winning the awards he coveted, he came to my office and begged me to save his, and I finally had him. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The air in the main conference room was thick with the smell of old leather and my father's self-satisfaction. It was the annual leadership breakfast, a tradition at Vance and Vance Architecture, and this was meant to be my day. For 20 years, I had been the heir apparent. I was Megan Vance, 38 years old, the senior architect who had designed the firm's most award-winning buildings. I was the one who pulled the all-nighters, the one who mentored the junior designers, the one who secured the billion-dollar Centennial Tower contract that was set to define the firm's next decade. I sat at the polished mahogany table, my hands clasped in my lap, a small, expectant smile on my face. My father, Arthur Vance, a formidable man of 68, stood at the head of the table. To his right, my younger brother, Julian, 35, slouched in his chair, scrolling through his phone. "Thank you all for a profitable fourth quarter," Arthur began, his voice booming with authority. "As you know, I have been planning my succession for some time. It is vital that the Vance name continues to represent strength, stability, and decisive leadership." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I had sacrificed everything for this moment. I'd given up a prestigious scholarship to MIT to join his firm right out of college. I'd managed the London office for 3 years alone, turning it from a failing outpost into our most profitable branch. I had earned this. "The future of this firm," Arthur continued, "must be in the hands of someone who understands the weight of the Vance legacy." He paused, and his eyes met mine. I saw a flicker of something. Was it an apology? Before his expression hardened into the familiar mask of the CEO. He then turned his gaze to my brother. "Which is why," he declared, "I am proud to name Julian Vance as the next CEO of Vance and Vance Architecture." The oxygen left the room. It was not a gasp, but a sudden, shared silence of disbelief. I felt the blood drain from my face. Julian looked up from his phone, a slow, smug smile spreading across his face, as if he'd just been told he won a door prize. I must have misheard. "What?" The word was a dry croak. Arthur didn't look at me, he looked at the other board members. Julian has shown great enthusiasm for the firm's future. Enthusiasm? I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Every eye was on me. "Father, he's a vice president of marketing. He hasn't designed a blueprint since his sophomore year internship. I am the senior architect. I brought in the Centennial Tower." Julian scoffed. "Calm down, Megan, it's just business." "This is not business, Julian. This is my life." I turned to my father, my voice shaking with a cold fury I hadn't known I possessed. "Tell me this is a joke. Tell me you are not handing the company I built to him." Arthur finally turned to face me. His eyes were cold, his jaw set. He spoke quietly, but his words cut through the room like a surgeon's scalpel. "The firm goes to your brother," he said, his voice flat and final. "This is not for a woman. This is not for a woman." The words hung in the air, stark and ugly. It wasn't an assessment of my skill. It wasn't a critique of my management style. It was a judgment on my very being. All my awards, all my sacrifices, all my 70-hour weeks erased by 4 simple words. I looked around the table. The other partners, men my father had known for decades, stared down at their notepads. Martha, my mentor and the 62-year-old head of engineering, looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated rage on my behalf. She made a motion to stand, but I held up a hand. I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. The shock was so profound, it had burned away the panic, leaving only a terrible clarity. I picked up my leather portfolio from the table. I straightened my blazer. I looked my father dead in the eye. I see, I said, my voice perfectly level. Then I am of no further use here. Megan, don't be dramatic, Arthur said dismissively. You will still have your role. No, I said, I won't. I turned to my brother. His smugness had been replaced by a faint, fleeting look of panic. He knew, even if my father was in denial, that he couldn't do this without me. Good luck, Julian, I said. You're going to need it. I walked out of the conference room, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I didn't look back. I walked past my office, the one with the G. Glass walls and the view of the skyline I had helped design. I didn't stop at my desk. I walked straight to the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and as the doors slid shut, I let out the first breath I'd been holding. I was 38 years old, and I was, for the first time in my life, unemployed. My entire future had been detonated, but as the elevator descended, the numbness was already hardening into something else. Something solid and sharp. The betrayal was worse than any professional failure could ever be, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. The lobby of the Vance and Vance building felt alien, like a museum of a life I used to live. The security guard at the front desk, a man who had greeted me by name every morning for 15 years, gave me a polite nod, unaware that I had just become a ghost. I walked out onto the street, the sounds of the city hitting me like a physical blow. I had no idea where to go. I had no car. My driver was a company perk. My apartment was paid for by the firm. My phone in my pocket was company property. I walked for blocks, aimlessly, the adrenaline of the confrontation giving way to a bone-deep, seismic shock. This is not for a woman. The phrase played on a loop in my head, each repetition chipping away at my sense of self. Had he always thought that? Every time he praised me, every time he put my designs on the cover of the company prospectus, was it all a lie? I finally found myself at a small park and sat on a bench, staring at a fountain. I pulled out my phone and looked at it. My life was in this device, and it wasn't even mine. My first call was to my personal lawyer. I need you to negotiate my exit, I said, my voice hollow. No, I'm not going back. I've been constructively dismissed. I explained the situation. He was silent for a moment, then let out a low whistle. He said what? He asked. In front of the board. In front of everyone, I confirmed. I want my capital account, I want my vested options, and I want my name off every document by close of business today. Megan, that's aggressive. They'll fight it. They won't, I said. Because if they do, you will file a lawsuit citing his exact words. The Centennial Tower contract has a diversity and inclusion clause. If their partners find out the CEO of Vance and Vance is a public misogynist, they'll pull the project. He won't risk it. My lawyer agreed. The cold, strategic part of my brain was kicking in, a defense mechanism against the overwhelming pain. My second call was to the bank to ensure my personal accounts were secure. My third was to a realtor. I needed a new apartment. By the time the sun started to dip, I was back at the building. I had to retrieve my personal effects. I used my keycard, half expecting it to be deactivated, but it beeped green. The office was quiet. Most people had gone home, blissfully unaware of the morning's explosion. I walked into my glass-walled office. The lights were off. I didn't turn them on. In the twilight, I packed my framed diplomas, my personal reference books, and a small, silver model of my first award-winning bridge. It took 10 minutes to pack 20 years. So, you're really doing it. I turned. Julian was leaning against the doorframe, a rocks glass in his hand. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked small and petulant. I am, I said, taping up the last box. It's a bit of an overreaction, don't you think? He said, swirling the amber liquid. Dad's from a different generation. He didn't mean it like that. He meant it exactly like that, Julian, and so do you. He had the grace to look away. Look, Megan, I'll still need you to oversee the Centennial Tower. I'm willing to give you a raise, a big one. Consider it a bonus for your cooperation. I stopped and looked at him. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was almost impressive. He thought he could buy my dignity. I am no longer an employee of this firm, I said, my voice quiet. The Centennial Tower is now your project. I'm sure your enthusiasm will be more than enough to handle the complex structural engineering and the zoning commission. His face paled. You can't just leave. The clients, they trust you. Then you shouldn't have taken a job you aren't qualified for, I said. I pushed the box past him into the hallway. Goodbye, Julian. As I waited for the elevator, my personal phone, a cheap one I'd bought at a corner store an hour ago, rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. He's a fool, Megan. It was Martha, the head of engineering. Her voice was rough with anger. He's an old, bitter fool, and he just drove this company off a cliff. Martha, I said, my voice finally breaking. The dam of professional calm shattered, and a sob caught in my throat. Hearing her kind, furious voice was my undoing. Don't you dare cry over them, she said fiercely. You listen to me. I've been with this firm for 30 years. I knew your mother. She would be so proud of you for walking out of that room. You are 10 times the architect your father ever was, and Julian can't even run a successful budget meeting. What do I do, Martha? I whispered, staring at my reflection in the polished steel elevator doors. You survive, she said. You pack up your pride, you find a new place to work, and you make them regret it. You call me when you're settled. The line clicked. I got into the elevator with my boxes. As the doors closed, I thought about her words. I thought about the fear I saw in Julian's eyes. I thought about the Centennial Tower, my beautiful, complex, half-finished design. I had built my entire identity around being the next leader of Vance and Vance. Now, I was nothing. But as I walked out of the building for the last time, a new, dangerous thought began to form. My father and brother had taken my past, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. I was the only one who knew how to build the future. The first few weeks were a blur of logistics and grief. I found a new apartment, a sterile, modern high-rise that felt nothing like home. My lawyer was brutal and efficient. As predicted, my father did not want a public fight. My severance was wired, my name was removed, and a crisp non-disclosure agreement was signed, one that, crucially, did not prevent me from competing, only from discussing the internal details of my departure. The silence that followed was deafening. No one from the old firm called, except for Martha, who checked in weekly. I was a pariah. I spent my days walking the city, portfolio in hand, interviewing at other large firms. The offers were instant and generous. Chief designer, regional director. Every firm wanted the architect who had secured the Centennial Tower. But something felt wrong. Every time I sat in a conference room that looked just like my father's, I felt a wave of nausea. I would be working for another Arthur. I would be dedicating my life to building someone else's legacy, all while mine was being mismanaged into the ground by my brother. One rainy afternoon, I was unpacking the last of my boxes and found a stack of old journals. They were my design notebooks from college. They were filled with wild, impractical ideas, buildings that breathed, skyscrapers made of biocomposite materials, homes that were fully self-sustaining. These were the designs I'd created before my father's traditionalism had sanded down my innovative edges, before practicality and brand consistency became my guiding principles. My father, Arthur Vance, was a brilliant architect of his time. He was a brutalist, a man who believed in concrete, steel, and imposing silhouettes. He built monuments to industry. He respected strength, and in his mind, strength was a masculine virtue. He had always loved me, I thought, but he had respected Julian. He saw Julian's gender as a qualification. My sacrifices for him were countless. I remembered winning the prestigious Pritzker Foundation scholarship to study sustainable design in Copenhagen. It was a dream. My father had sat me down. That's a lovely distraction, Megan, he'd said, but it's a fad. The real work is here. I need you on the new bank headquarters. So I stayed. I designed the bank headquarters. It won 3 industry awards for the firm. Julian, meanwhile, had spent that year on a gap year in Southeast Asia after dropping out of business school for the second time. When he finally joined the firm, he was given the marketing department, a role with no real responsibility, designed to keep him out of the way. He was lazy, uninspired, and deeply arrogant, armed with the unshakable confidence that only a mediocre man who has never been challenged can possess. He was the perfect antagonist, a hollow suit who believed he was a visionary. My father was the tragic one, a man so trapped in his own prejudices that he would rather destroy his own company than admit he was wrong. I sat on the floor of my new, empty living room, the old sketches spread out around me. The anger that had been simmering for weeks finally boiled over into a cold, clear resolve. I wasn't going to join another firm. I was going to build one. I was going to build the firm I'd sketched in those notebooks. A firm that embraced the fads my father mocked. A firm that focused on sustainable, tech-integrated, human-centric design. I wasn't just going to find a new job. I was going to make my father and brother obsolete. I spent the next week in a creative frenzy. I drained my savings, leased a small, two-room office in a co-op building, and drew up a business plan. I called my company Momentum Design. The name was a promise that my work would always move forward. I had the vision, I had the drive, but I was one person. The work I wanted to do, competing with the Goliaths like Vance and Vance, required an engineering and structural team. I needed infrastructure, and I needed it fast. I needed the one-person M. Why father and brother couldn't afford to lose. I called Martha. "I need to see you," I said. "Tonight, not on the phone." We met at an old, quiet restaurant far from the financial district. Martha looked tired. The lines around her eyes were deeper than they had been a month ago. "How are you, child?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "I'm starting my own firm," I said, sliding a single-page business summary across the table. She read it, her eyebrows shot up. "Megan, this is ambitious. You're going directly after the green tech sector. Arthur always said that was financial." "A fad," I finished. "I know he's wrong, it's the future." "He is wrong," Martha agreed, "but he has the resources, the manpower. You have a small office and your savings." "I have a plan," I said, leaning forward. "Vance and Vance is a dinosaur. They are slow, expensive, and wasteful. Their designs are outdated. Julian is in charge now. How long, realistically, before the cracks start to show?" Martha let out a dark, humorless laugh. "Weeks. He's already tried to streamline the engineering department by cutting our simulations software budget. He's promising clients timelines we can't possibly meet. He's a fool, and he's running the place into the ground. But I'm 62, Megan. I have 3 years until retirement. I can't just." "I'm not asking you to be an employee, Martha," I said, my heart pounding. This was the moment. "I'm asking you to be my partner, Chief Operations Officer and Head of Engineering, 30% equity." She stared at me, speechless. "You and I both know you are the backbone of that entire company," I continued, my voice low and urgent. "You are the one who makes my design stand. You are the one who makes everyone's design stand. At Vance and Vance, you are a department head. At Momentum Design, you will build a legacy. Your legacy." I let the words sink in. I was offering her a gamble, but I was also offering her the one thing Arthur had never given either of us: respect. She looked at the business plan again, then at me. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "He's going to be so angry." "I'm counting on it," I said. "We'll need to poach the best," she said, her mind already working, the engineer in her taking over. "I need Tamishi from R&D and Chen from Acoustics. They're both brilliant, and Julian just denied their requests for new equipment." "Poach them," I said, a grin splitting my face. "All right, Megan Vance," she said, raising her water glass. "Let's go build the future." The first 6 months at Momentum Design were a brutal, exhilarating blur. We worked out of a cramped, sun-drenched co-op space that smelled of new paint and burnt coffee. Our team was small. Myself, Martha, and the 2 brilliant senior engineers she'd poached from Vance and Vance, Tamishi and Chen. We were a skeleton crew of industry veterans, fueled by a shared sense of purpose and a profound frustration with our old boss. Our clever trap wasn't a complex legal maneuver or an act of sabotage. It was simply innovation. While Julian was busy holding redundant meetings and approving new, thicker carpet for the executive wing, we were designing. We focused on the exact niche Arthur had spent a decade mocking: sustainable, tech-integrated, green tech architecture. We designed buildings that recycled their own water, had living walls that purified the air, and used predictive AI to minimize energy consumption. The work was thrilling, but we were burning through my savings at an alarming rate. We needed a client. We needed a flagship project to prove our concepts weren't just fads. The opportunity came from an unexpected place, the local university. They were planning a new science and technology building and had opened the contract for bids. It was a prestigious project, but at $80 million, it was considered small time for a giant like Vance and Vance. For us, it was everything. "They're bidding on it," Martha said, walking into my office, which was really just a corner of the open plan room with a tablet. "Vance and Vance, Julian himself is leading the proposal." "Of course he is," I said, rubbing my temples. "It's a splashy, community-facing project, perfect for his new CEO image." "Their proposal is exactly what you'd expect," Martha said, scrolling. "It's a concrete and glass box. A smaller, cheaper version of the bank headquarters you designed 5 years ago. It's lazy, Megan." "Then we won't be lazy," I said. For the next 2 weeks, we didn't sleep. We threw out the traditional rulebook. Instead of a box, we designed a living building. We incorporated a geothermal heating system, a rooftop solar array that would feed energy back into the campus grid, and a central atrium that used passive airflow for cooling. Our design was not only more beautiful and innovative, but we proved, through meticulous data, that it would cost 30% less to operate over the building's lifespan. The day of tea. Presentation, I walked into the university boardroom and saw Julian for the first time in half a year. He was standing with 2 junior designers from our old firm, looking smug. When he saw me, his smile faltered, replaced by a look of baffled contempt. "Megan," he said, as if noticing a bug, "are you consulting for someone?" "Something like that," I said, setting up my laptop. "This is my firm, Momentum Design." His laugh was loud and incredulous. "This is your firm, this little startup you're bidding against us?" "We are," I said calmly. Julian presented first. He was slick, all marketing buzzwords and grand, empty gestures. He talked about the Vance legacy and the permanence of his concrete monolith. The board looked polite, but bored. Then it was my turn. I didn't talk about legacy. I talked about the future. I showed them how our building would be a teaching tool for the students inside it. I showed them the data, the energy savings, the beauty of a structure that worked with its environment, not against it. When I finished, there was a long silence. The president of the university looked at my father's concrete box, then at my living building. "Ms. Vance," she said, a small smile on her face, "you've given us a very easy decision. The contract is yours." I shook her hand, my own trembling. We had done it. We had our flagship project. I was packing my laptop when Julian stormed over to me, his face a mottled, ugly red. "What did you do?" he hissed, keeping his voice low so the board members couldn't hear. "I designed a better building, Julian," I said simply. "You stole our client, you poached our staff. You're trying to destroy this family." "You and father took care of that already," I said, zipping my bag. "You took a small-time community project for granted. You put my father's old design in a new wrapper and thought no one would notice. You didn't lose to me, Julian. You lost to your own incompetence." He actually lunged at me, his hand grabbing my arm. "You'll regret this. I'll bury you. I'll tell every supplier in the city not to work with you." I pulled my arm free, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. "You do that, and I will call the board of the Centennial Tower. I'll send them a copy of your proposal for this building, and I'll ask them if they feel confident that the man who just lost an $80 million contract to a four-person startup is capable of managing their $2 billion. The color drained from his face. He knew I had him. "Stay out of my way, Julian," I said. I walked out of that room as the founder and CEO of a successful, award-winning firm. The first cracks in the Vance and Vance empire were showing, and I had been the one to hold the hammer. The university's Helix building, as we'd named it, became the talk of the architectural world. It was finished on time and under budget, a marvel of green engineering. It won the Innovate in Architecture prize, and my face, as the lead designer, was on the cover of Architecture Digest. Momentum Design was no longer a startup. We were the new standard. My first true confrontation had been with Julian, but the victory revealed a much deeper problem within my old firm. The industry was changing, and Vance and Vance was being left behind. Julian, in his panic, responded not with innovation, but with petty imitation. Suddenly, Vance and Vance's new proposals were littered with eco-friendly buzzwords. They tacked solar panels onto their concrete boxes and called them green. It was a desperate, superficial attempt to copy our success, and clients saw right through it. The real confrontation, the one that truly shattered the illusion of the Vance dynasty, came 3 months later. It was the annual Tri-State Architecture Gala, the biggest industry event of the year. I attended as an award winner. My father and Julian were there as legacy sponsors. I saw Arthur before he saw me. He was standing by the bar, looking older and more tired than I had ever seen him. He was holding a glass of scotch, but he wasn't drinking. He was watching Julian, who was loudly trying to impress the CEO of a major development group. "The truth is, sustainability is just a buzzword," Julian was saying, his voice carrying. "You need strength. You need a Vance building." The CEO, a sharp woman named Sarah Chen, smiled politely. "I'm not so sure, Julian. Have you seen what Momentum Design did at the university? That's not a buzzword. That's a 30% reduction in operating costs. That's real money." "A fluke," Julian snapped, his voice too loud. "My sister got lucky. She has no infrastructure. She can't handle a major project." "That's not what I hear," Sarah said, her eyes drifting over Julian's shoulder. "In fact, I hear she's here tonight." Julian turned and his eyes met mine. The entire cocktail area seemed to fall silent. This was it. I walked toward them, my head held high. Arthur saw me coming and took an involuntary step forward, as if to intercept me. "Julian, Mr. Vance," I said, nodding to my father. "Ms. Chen, a pleasure." "Megan," Sarah's face lit up. "Congratulations on the Helix building. It's truly revolutionary. I was just telling Julian how impressed we are." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice warm. "We're very proud of it." "She's a one-hit wonder," Julian muttered, his jealousy making him sloppy. "She can't handle a real project, like the Centennial Tower." This was the opening I had been waiting for. I turned to him, my expression one of polite, academic curiosity. "Speaking of the tower, Julian, how is the Phase 2 zoning review? I remember the air rights negotiations with the city were incredibly complex. Did you manage to resolve the turbine vibration issue in the upper atmosphere simulations?" Julian's face went blank. He had no idea what I was talking about. These were complex, critical details I had been handling personally before I left. We have our best people on it," he blustered. "Of course you do," I said, with a small, knowing smile. I turned back to Sarah Chen. "The truth is, Julian is right. Vance and Vance is a legacy firm. They are fantastic at building a certain kind of building. The kind my father built 20 years ago." Arthur flinched as if I'd slapped him. "But Momentum," I continued, "is interested in what's next. We're leaner, we're more agile, and we believe saving a client money on operating costs is the new definition of strength. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe they're calling my name for the Design of the Year award." I smiled at all of them and walked away, leaving Julian speechless and my father staring after me, his face a mask of dawning horror. He had just watched his son, the new CEO, be publicly and professionally dismantled in under 30 seconds. He hadn't seen a woman being dramatic. He had seen a superior architect expose his chosen heir as a fraud. Later that evening, Martha found me by the terrace. "That was quite a performance," she said, a glass of champagne in her hand. "He made it too easy," I said, watching the city lights. "You know, an old friend of mine is on the Centennial Tower board," she said casually. I looked at her. "Oh. Yes, and he's concerned. Julian has missed 2 major deadlines, the ones you just mentioned. The turbine simulations and the air rights package. He's been sending them marketing brochures instead of engineering data. The board is getting nervous." A cold thrill ran down my spine. How nervous? Nervous enough that my friend asked me if Momentum Design would be theoretically capable of taking on a project of that scale, should the need arise. The clever trap I had set by founding my firm was about to be sprung. Julian's incompetence, which I had counted on, was my greatest weapon. He was failing, just as I knew he would. And the biggest, most important project of my father's career was now hanging by a thread. "Theoretically," I said to Martha, a slow smile spreading across my face, "I think we are." The gala was the turning point. Julian, humiliated and enraged, went on the offensive, but his attempts to regain control were desperate and clumsy. He began slashing the prices for Vance and Vance's bids, trying to undercut us on projects. But he was slashing prices on outdated, expensive-to-run designs. He won a few bids, but they were low-margin projects that would end up costing the firm money. He was selling off the family silver to spite me. Meanwhile, Momentum Design was exploding. The Helix building had opened the floodgates. We were fielding calls from clients all over the world. We had to move out of our co-op space and into a full floor of a new high-rise. We hired 30 new designers and engineers, handpicking the best and brightest. We were the company everyone wanted to work for. Martha, through her network, was my eyes and ears. Her investigation into the Vance and Vance finances was less of an investigation and more of a concerned friend network. The news was grim. "He's mortgaged the company headquarters," Martha told me one morning, closing my office door. She looked pale. "Arthur must have signed off on it. They're using the loan to cover the operating losses from the low-margin contracts Julian took." "He's running the company on debt," I breathed, horrified. "He's bankrupting them." "It's worse than that," she said, pulling up a file on her tablet. "The Centennial Tower. The board gave Julian a final 30-day deadline to deliver the revised engineering specs you mentioned. The deadline was yesterday. And he sent them nothing. A 20-page document about the Vance legacy and a new artist's rendering of the lobby. The board chair, my friend, he's calling an emergency meeting for next week. He told Julian to bring his father." The call I had been waiting for came 2 days later. It wasn't from the board, it was from Arthur, my father. I hadn't spoke to him in nearly a year. His name on my caller ID made my hand shake. I let it ring twice before answering. "Megan," his voice was gravelly, strained. "Hello, father," I said, my own voice cool and distant. I hear your new firm is doing very well. The university building. It's impressive." "It is," I said. "What do you want?" He was silent. I could hear his labored breathing. The great Arthur Vance reduced to this. "We are, your family, Megan, Julian is your brother, this rivalry you've created." I cut him off, the old anger flaring. "I created nothing. You gave him my job because I am a woman. That's not a rivalry, father, that's a betrayal." "He's in trouble," Arthur said, ignoring me. "The Centennial Board, they don't understand him. They're being unreasonable. They're threatening to pull the contract." "They're not being unreasonable," I said. "They're asking for the engineering data he doesn't have and doesn't understand. He's missed every critical deadline. He's putting the entire project at risk." You could help him," Arthur said, his voice dropping. "Just this once, as a consultant, help him with the specs, for the good of the family name." I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. After all this, after a year of my success, he still saw me as a supporting character. A consultant for the real CEO. "No," I said. "Megan, please, I'm asking you, this project, it will ruin us." "I am aware of that," I said. "And I will not help Julian. I will not be his safety net. He has to face the consequences of his own actions. And so do you." "You would let your own family fail," he whispered, and for the first time, I heard real, genuine despair in his voice. "You already did," I said. "Goodbye, Father." I hung up the phone, my heart pounding. This was it, the final break. The very next morning, I received a formal, encrypted email from the chairman of the Centennial Tower Board. "Ms. Vance, as you may be aware, we are holding an emergency review meeting regarding the future of the Centennial Tower project. Mr. Vance and Mr. Julian Vance will be in attendance to defend their position. Given your firm's recent, extraordinary work in the sustainable tech space, the board formally requests that Momentum Design present an alternative proposal for the project. Should we find the current leadership solutions lacking? The meeting is in 5 days. Can you be ready?" I looked at the email. I looked at the original Centennial Tower blueprints, which I still had stored on a private drive. I had designed that building. I knew its flaws, its potential, its every secret. I called Martha, Tamishi, and Chen into my office. "Cancel your week," I said, projecting the email onto the main screen. "We have 5 days to redesign the most important skyscraper in this city." They didn't complain. They didn't panic. They just looked at me, a wolf-pack grin spreading across Tamishi's face. "We're going to take it from them, aren't we?" he said. "No," I said, pulling up my old files. "We're going to show them how it should have been built in the first place." The emergency board meeting was held in a private room at the most exclusive hotel in the city. The room was all dark wood and hushed, expensive silence. The air was thick with tension. At the head of a massive U-shaped table sat the board, 8 of the most powerful investors and city planners in the country. At the far end, looking small and ill at ease, sat my father and my brother. Arthur looked ashen, a man hollowed out by stress. Julian was vibrating with a frantic, angry energy, his suit just a little too tight, his face slick with sweat. Then the chairman spoke. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we are here because the Centennial Tower project is 180 days behind schedule and is critically failing on all engineering deliverables. Julian, Arthur, you have 30 minutes to explain why this board should not terminate your contract, effective immediately." Julian stood up, fumbling with a laptop. "Gentlemen, I assure you Vance and Vance is, we are, the legacy." He launched into the same, tired marketing speech, all bluster and no substance. He clicked to a slide, a garish new rendering of the lobby. "Mr. Vance," the chairman interrupted, his voice laced with ice. "We are not here to discuss the lobby. We are here to discuss the unresolved turbine vibration issue, which your team has failed to simulate. We are here to discuss the air rights package you have failed to secure. We are here to discuss the $200 million in cost overruns we are projecting due to your delays." Julian stammered. "Our engineers are. It's a very complex." "It is complex," the chairman agreed. "Which is why we were so confused when you fired Martha Jennings, the only engineer on your staff who seemed to understand it. Arthur, do you have anything to add? Or did you just come to watch your son self-destruct?" My father, the great Arthur Vance, sank lower in his chair. He had nothing. "Very well," the chairman said, his face grim. "Given that Vance and Vance has no solution, the board has taken the liberty of soliciting an alternative." "An alternative," Julian sputtered. "You can't, we have a contract." "A contract you are in breach of," the chairman snapped. "The doors, please." The heavy oak doors at the back of the room opened, and Martha and I walked in. If my father looked ashen before, he now looked like a corpse. His mouth fell open. Julian's face went from red to a blotchy, pale white. He looked like he was going to be sick. "Megan," Arthur whispered, as if he'd seen a ghost. "Ms. Vance," the chairman said, his voice all business. "The floor is yours." "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," I said, my voice clear and strong. I plugged in my laptop. The screen lit up, not with a rendering but with hard data. "The problem with the Centennial Tower was never the design," I began. "It was the execution. The turbine vibration issue isn't a flaw, it's a power generation opportunity. The air rights issue isn't a legal block, it's an innovation challenge." For the next 20 minutes, I didn't just present a building, I presented a solution. I showed them a complete redesign. We had replaced the top 20 floors with a lighter biocomposite frame. We had used the wind vibration issue to power the building's microgrid, turning a flaw into an asset. We had solved the air rights issue by creating a public access, high-altitude green space, satisfying the city's zoning demands. Our design wasn't just more beautiful, it was smarter, it was cheaper, and it was finished. "We have solved all of the project's critical engineering flaws," I concluded. "We have renegotiated the supplier contracts, and we can have this project back on schedule in 30 days. Momentum Design is ready to break ground." The room was silent. The board members looked at my presentation, then at each other, and then at Julian, who was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "This is a joke," Julian finally exploded, slamming his hand on the table. "She stole this. That's my father's design. She's a thief." "Mr. Vance," I said calmly, not taking my eyes off the board. "I am the original architect of record for this project. What I have presented today is a new design, created by my firm, which solves the problems your leadership created." "She's a woman," Julian shouted, his voice cracking, all pretense of professionalism gone. She can't run a project like this. Tell them, Dad, tell them this isn't for a woman." He looked at my father, his face desperate. Arthur looked at his son, his expression unreadable. He looked at the board, who were staring at him in disgust. Then, he looked at me. He saw the woman who had just saved his legacy from his own son's incompetence. He saw the CEO who was in total control. My father, for the first time in his life, said nothing. He just slowly, agonizingly, put his face in his hands. Julian's hysterical plea hung in the dead air. That was the moment it all broke. The moment the spell was shattered. The moment everyone in the room saw the truth. The chairman didn't even call for a vote. Mr. Vance," he said, addressing Arthur and Julian. "Your contract with the Centennial Tower project is hereby terminated, effective immediately. Security will see you out." Julian looked at me, his eyes promising murder, but he was broken. He was a child who had been found out. "As for you, Ms. Vance," the chairman said, turning to me with a smile, "welcome to the project. Let's get to work." The downfall of Vance and Vance architecture was swift and total. The loss of the Centennial Tower, their flagship project, triggered a default on the loan Julian had taken out on the headquarters. The suppliers he had failed to pay filed lawsuits. Within a month, the company was in receivership. The Vance name, once a symbol of strength, was now a case study in mismanagement and disgrace. Momentum Design, meanwhile, was the new star of the industry. Taking over the Centennial project was a massive, complex undertaking, but my team was energized. We were the company that had done the impossible. 2 months after the board meeting, my assistant buzzed me. "Ms. Vance, a Mr. Arthur Vance and a Mr. Julian Vance are in the lobby. They don't have an appointment." "Send them in," I said. I stood and waited, looking out the window of my new corner office. It was on the 50th floor, with a panoramic view of the city, including the rising skeleton of the Centennial Tower. The door opened, my father and brother walked in. They were shadows of their former selves. Their suits were a little rumpled. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, weary desperation. "Megan," Arthur began, his voice a dry rasp. "Your office, it's very high." "It's practical," I said. "You can see all the jobs see." Tess from here, what can I do for you? Julian, surprisingly, spoke first. We want you to buy the company, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. I raised an eyebrow. Buy what exactly? Your debt, your lawsuits, your tarnished brand. There is no company left, Julian. The name, Arthur burst out, his voice cracking. The Vance name, your grandfather, all I built. You can't let it just disappear. You can't let it be sold for parts in a bankruptcy auction. It's your name, too. There it was, the final desperate plea. It is my name, I said quietly. A name you told me wasn't good enough to lead. A name you told me was secondary to my gender. I was wrong, Arthur whispered. The words were so quiet I almost missed them. He looked up and his eyes were full of a terrible, profound shame. I was wrong, Megan. I was an old fool. I was afraid. I didn't understand your designs. They scared me. Julian, he was simple. He was what I knew. And I destroyed everything. Please, don't let my life's work die because of my arrogance. I looked at this broken man, my father. The rage I had held onto for a year finally, surprisingly, dissipated. It was replaced by a cold, clear-eyed pity. I will not buy Vance and Vance, I said. Arthur crumpled. I will, I continued, absorb it. I will take on the debt, and in exchange, Momentum Design will take possession of all remaining assets. The name, the archives, the client lists. It will become a division of my company. A division, Julian scoffed, a flicker of his old self returning. A historical projects division, I said. And here are my non-negotiable terms. First, Arthur, you will retire. Effective today, you will have no role, no title, and no say in my company. My father nodded, agreed. Second, I said, turning to my brother, you will be offered a position. Junior designer, grade 1, you will report to Tamishi. You will have no leadership authority, no client-facing role, and your salary will be commensurate with your new title. You will learn how to actually design a building from the ground up. A junior designer, Julian sputtered. That's an insult. I was a CEO. You were a placeholder, I said, my voice like steel. You have 30 seconds to accept or the offer is rescinded and I let the firm go to auction. I don't need your archives, Julian. This is a courtesy. Julian looked at my father. Arthur just stared at the floor. Fine, Julian spat. Good, I said. The lawyers will have the papers ready by 5. They left my office. I watched them go, 2 men who had lost their empire. An hour later, Martha came in. The papers are being drafted, she said. You did it. We did it, I corrected her. We stood at the window together, looking out at the city. The frame of the Centennial Tower was growing, a monument to the future we were building. He finally said it, I said quietly, that he was wrong. He is, Martha said, putting a hand on my shoulder. But you, Megan Vance, were right. I had my reconciliation, not in a tearful family reunion, but in a transfer of power. I had my justice, not in a courtroom, but on the skyline of the city. My father had wanted a legacy, and I had given it to him. It just wasn't the one he'd planned. It was mine.